The balance breakdown is back, everybody, and we're going to put some balance into your life by not covering some UFC action this week. We're actually going to focus a little bit on the PFL Paris card and the Cage Warriors cards that took place last weekend. We're going to pick and choose a couple of fights from both cards, that a couple of highlight performances, a couple of talking points, and whatnot. I am here, as always, by the king himself, Harry Powell. The ultimate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion. He, behind closed doors, he doesn't talk about this enough, but he signed up for a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition, had nobody sign up in that bracket to compete. So he's the official London Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion now, because everyone else was afraid to sign up into his bracket and take him on. Where are you? I'm calling out all Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. Give this man a match. Give him a match. I mean, he doesn't want it in the gi either. It's no gi or nothing at all, Harry. Is that right? You were robbed of the opportunity of competing this weekend. There was a big build-up here behind the scenes. We've been talking for many weeks. But nobody turned up, Harry. That's the first breakdown we have to do today.
Yeah, I mean, I fucking hate competing. Like, I really hate it. But it's something that's necessary. I think at least 3 times a year or something, maybe 2 times a year, whatever it is. And yeah, I signed up for a show, and not for a show, but for a competition type thing. And yeah, nobody entered my bracket. And your man that was running it, he offered me a gi match about 4 days out, and I said, well, I've not put the gi on for about 5 years, so I'm not sure that's of any use to me. But how's never, we are here, and we will give another competition a go on another day. That's for sure.
That's it. If people have the confidence to go up against you, Harry, that's what I think it will happen. But maybe we'll see what happens. I wouldn't blame them for not wanting. If they tune in here and listen to your excellent breakdowns, or if they look at the Severe Spotlight every week, I can't blame them for not wanting to show up. I cannot blame them. But I digress. We shall move on. Someone who did show up this weekend, Harry, and showed up in a big way. That was Cedric Doumbé, who headlined the PFL Paris card. And we're going to start straight from the top and work our way down through this card. We have about 5 fights that we like to discuss on that card. And Cedric Doumbé at the top of it, a lot of hype for him coming into this fight. And I guess my thoughts on it was, I didn't realize, and I'll hold my hand to my chest, didn't realize. I knew Doumbé was a big kind of a character. I didn't realize how big of a star he was, and it was on full show, I think, at PFL this weekend. From the weigh-ins to any interviews that happened, from the actual fight itself, which, I mean, I think we'll probably talk about a lot more about the external stuff going on around this fight, more so than actually what happened in the fight. Anyone who didn't see it, it was over within 9 seconds. Basically, Jordan Zebo was his opponent, came out. Cedric Doumbé threw a body kick. It was caught by Jordan Zebo, or caught by Cedric Doumbé, and countered with a left hook and followed up with vicious ground and pound, and Zebo was out instantly. The fight was over. The place went nuts. But like I said, the build-up, the walkout, the chanting before the fight, it was a spectacle, Harry, wasn't it?
I mean, the PFL have a bona fide star on their hands, especially in that region of the world. I mean, we've seen, I think, specifically with French fighters, you look at somebody like Morgan Charrier, when he comes overseas and he fights in London or wherever it is he fights, he brings quite literally an army of fans with him in a way that we don't usually see for other fighters. It's something that we've long lamented about American stars, is they don't have that cult following. They don't have that sort of national pride following, if you will. Whereas it looks like people like Cyril Gagné and to some extent Francis Ngannou, and then now Cedric Doumbé certainly have that following. And something I think that's interesting is PFL obviously knew what they had going in, and they've extrapolated out a card that, okay, we'll get into the card, right? And we'll get into sort of the nuts and bolts in a bit, but they extrapolated a card around one man. And that man is, okay, a storied kickboxer, but he had 4 fights, like 4 MMA fights, and you build a card around him, and you build a card around him not because he's had 4 fights, but you build a card around him because of exactly what we saw on the weekend. If you have Hakimi and Mbappe turn up to watch you compete, and you have a crowd at your absolute beck and call.
And Jules
That's
Koundé
it,
from Barcelona, centre back as well.
right?
Big guys. That might not resonate with a lot of people, but that is a big deal, especially Kylian Mbappe and Hakimi, huge soccer stars. And like, I mean, Mbappe is up there with one of the biggest sports stars in the world, in my opinion, at this stage, to be honest.
For sure, for sure. And to then, I think, it was, and I hate to do this really, but it's very similar to the Dublin performance for Connor, in that the entire week people started to realize what a star they had on their hands, and it seemed just like magic in a bottle. Now, the card itself in Ireland was fantastic. The whole thing built and the crescendo was what it was. But this card, I mean, it wasn't amazing. It wasn't a fantastic card. There were some good performances on it, but the pacing was bad and there was a lot of fights to get through and etc. etc. But something changed the moment that co-main event finished and the moment that Cedric Doumbé began to make his walk into the belly of the arena. The room, the feeling, even just from watching it on television, changed. And that only happens when you have fire in a bottle, when you have magic in a bottle. And to come out and have control of an arena in the way he did, to use the props in the way that he did, to attract the stars in the way that he did, and for all of that to align to a 9-second performance is just virality in and of itself. And in this day and age, not just in MMA, but more globally out on social media, you are looking for viral moments to really sort of push. Those are the moments that those are the moments that you're looking for to really sort of push you over the edge as an organization, as a promotion, but also as an athlete, as a star, as a fighter. And I think we have talked ad nauseum about why kickboxing or Muay Thai or whatever it is doesn't get the reverie that it maybe deserves in some circles. But when you go out and perform like Cedric Doumbé did, and I don't mean necessarily his athletic endeavor, but when you go out and perform in the way you did in the walkout, in the interviews, and then again in the post-fight press conferences, couple that with what he did, which was just a decimation.
Yeah.
It's an
And I
absolute
think like everything that happens around becomes irrelevant if you don't go out there and perform like that as well. And I was unsure what to expect. I had seen a couple of his previous performances. I guess look at obviously the big question surrounding a kickboxer coming into mixed martial arts is how good his takedown defense is, or how good he would be against a wrestler or whatnot, and everything like that. Look at he's been somewhat tested, and he's shown like some levels of know-how to stop a takedown. But obviously that's going to get more and more tested as he goes along in his career. You likened it, Harry, to Connor's performance in Dublin that time, and I like that comparison, but it's simply, to me, not the same because it happened in the PFL, I think. And this is where we're going to bring the conversation right now. I feel what we need in mixed martial arts is guys like Cedric Doumbé fighting at the highest level, at the best promotion. And it's something that the UFC maybe didn't find too much value in doing it. Obviously, what happened was there was an original agreement that he was signed with the UFC. He was set to fight on a Paris card. The commission would not commission him. There was some doctors' issues, but he did get cleared by doctors. But the final nail in the coffin in Cedric Doumbé's UFC career was the fact that the French MMA commission wouldn't commission him to fight until he got a couple of more fights under his belt. That led to the decision of the UFC to not pursue with Cedric Doumbé. They released him. They made him a free agent. He subsequently cut a deal with the PFL, and that's how he ended up there. And you know how I feel. I was talking the same about likes of Roberto Soldic and stuff like that. Well, it is a big moment. This what happened last Saturday night, and all the circumstances that we kind of spoke about was a big deal, but it could have been bigger. Do you think that the UFC missed a little bit of a step in maybe not picking up Doumbé, maybe not making something happen there? I'm very curious to hear your opinion on that.
Not really. And the only reason I say not really is because they don't care about being the best organization in terms of the fighters on the roster anymore.
But can you say that if you're an employee of the UFC and you've seen what happened with the whole spectacle, that you could honestly say to yourself, fuck, I think we messed up a little bit there by not pursuing that? Because obviously, look at the offer that was on the table from the UFC, and an offer that Cedric Doumbé did sign originally was a 20 show and a 20 win contract that ultimately wasn't honored because the release happened after the French Commission did. He subsequently signed for 140 with the PFL. Decent money, fair play. I'm happy for him that he's getting paid as well. But you tell me that that performance or that whole spectacle or the hype that created with big superstars in attendance and the stories that could be created after the performance as well wasn't worth $140 to the UFC or $1,000?
It's not to do with the money. Like for the
UFC, I look at it as not, UFC not seeing value in paying Cedric Doumbé what he wants, though. It is clearly that.
I don't think it's that either. I think that for me, the UFC have a strict line, right? And the strict line is you either fit into it or we don't care who you are. Now, I agree to some extent that they don't see value in him. They may not see value in pulling him in at the record that he's in. But the UFC are absolutely a no-hassle organization. And Cedric Doumbé
they're a no-hassle organization, and John Jones is their champion with multiple domestic violence charges and everybody else who's there. I think they don't mind a little bit of hassle.
You have to get to a certain level in the UFC. And this comes with every company. With almost every company, when you first start out with them, you need the company, they don't need you, right? And then it comes to a point where you've either accumulated enough or generated enough revenue for the company, or you've gained enough experience within the company that those tables start to turn a little.
And I don't think we should get into the argument of what we think the UFC is doing or what it's not doing. It's like, do we agree with what they're doing or do we not agree with it? Because I really don't agree with what they're doing, where they're not valuing stars like Cedric Doumbé, and they are valuing maybe lesser known, lesser paid stars that are willing to toe the line. Like, we know what the business model of the UFC is now. It's not the same as what it used to be. It used to be like 10 years ago, UFC would have almost certainly snapped up a guy like Cedric Doumbé, for sure. I think we both can agree with that. But they're choosing not to do that now. They're choosing to bring in lower tier fighters for lower tier pay to fit their business model. And that's why they're so successful. Fair play to them. Like, fair play to them. I just don't like it. I simply don't like it. And I think it's a shame. Like, we want what's best for mixed martial arts. And what's best for mixed martial arts is having as much good light shone on the sport as possible. So we're in a stage right now where we're either expecting guys not to sign or accepting the fact that UFC are lowballing certain fighters, which I don't agree with either. Are we expecting Cedric Doumbé to sign in on that 20 and 20 contract? Are we expecting Cedric Doumbé to undermine his talent and his skill? I understand. I've been on record before and talking about Paddy Pimblett and taking a gamble, and he did by taking a pay cut, and I can understand that. But we're talking about Cedric Doumbé, who's 30 years of age right now, who has created his stardom through kickboxing, similar enough to the likes of Alex Bahia, who got brought into the UFC at a similar enough kind of a record that Doumbé was at, and worked his way up into championship and fought for a title at 6 or 7-1. So that kind of adds fuel to my fire. And my opinion is that if we can do it for people like Alex Bahia, why can't we do it for guys like Cedric Doumbé? It just doesn't make any sense. And I think it's because the UFC didn't see value. I think somebody dropped the ball. Because, I even said myself, I didn't realize how big of a star he was, but I understand now a lot better. But it's not my job it is my job to understand, but when you're working for the UFC and you're a talent scout, you need to be recognizing that. And it's all there. I mean, he has the following online and social media. He's undefeated. He likes to knock people out. Yes, he's not the most experienced mixed martial arts, but he's ticking off a lot of the boxes to a couple of other stars or a couple of other people that maybe have come in on entry-level contracts or through Dana White's Contender Series fights as well. I just very, very curious as to the fact why the UFC are not choosing to sign these particular guys. I mean, there's a couple of different examples over the last couple of years that have kind of led me to believe that UFC have completely changed their business model, and for a brand that are wanting to promote themselves as being the best in the world and having the best fighters, they simply don't do what they're saying that they're doing, in my opinion.
So I don't even think they are trying to promote themselves as the best anymore. I think
yes, they are, because Dana White is there. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm cutting you over. I really apologize. I think they are, because Dana White is coming out in press conferences every single week and shitting all over the other competition to say why it would anybody in their right mind want to purchase Bellator, which completely berates the promotion, belittles the promotion and all the fighters that are in it. And he said some next to no good stuff about the PFL in the past as well. So I think they are, like, if you're going to belittle other promotions at every given chance that you can, well, you're doing that. You're berating other promotions in comparison to your own promotion that you think is the best.
Yeah, but it's the lens with which they're looking through it. For Dana White and for Ari Emanuel, it's nothing to do with. This is my opinion. There's nothing to do, or it's far less to do with what fighters you have on your roster. It's more about how much money's in the bank, like. And so the PFL and Bellator, the reason he can berate them is because the UFC is the only MMA promotion turning a profit. And they're not just turning a profit, they're raking in all of the cash possible. For somebody like, and this is why I think they turned down guys like Cedric Doumbé. It's not because Cedric Doumbé wants to be paid 140 grand. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think what's a problem for the UFC is that they want a guy that turns up on fight week, talks properly, and then goes and knocks people out. When the commission say we're not commissioning him because he's too
I
inexperienced.
kind of slightly disagree with that with people. We've had multiple champions that can't speak properly or proper English. We have
I mean,
Sean Strickland is up there fucking being a misogynist. And
it's to do with speaking in a manner that they want to hear. They need a person. They want a personality. It's not to do with English. Obviously, when the Brazilians come in and the English thing, that's certainly an issue. But it's not the fact that they care about speaking English or not. They care about a personality. Now, the problem, I think, one of the large.
You don't think that it wouldn't have a personality in Cedric Doumbé, who was chanting how he was going to kill his opponent and the crowd playing in? I mean, that's as good as a personality that you can get. Like, I mean, I don't know. I feel very strongly about that, to be honest. I don't know. It's just because it's me going back to the way it used to be, and I understand that it's not the way it used to be anymore. But it just doesn't make any sense to me, Mike. It just does not make any sense. Like,
well, it doesn't make any sense to you because you love MMA.
yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense to you because you put MMA over money, but that's not what the UFC is anymore. And the UFC are absolutely fine having cards.
Sorry, folks. A bit of connectivity issues. That's why you'll hear a break in a little bit of the conversation. I think it's Dana White coming in, Harry, and he doesn't want me talking bad about the company. He must be listening. He must be listening. Sorry, you were saying before I cut off, Harry. Please continue.
Yeah. I think the first sign, or one of the first signs that the UFC have that a fight is going to be potentially problematic, they will, shake their hands of them. And the MMA Commission, for me, was that in France. Now, we know that the MMA Commission in France is notorious. I do think the UFC dropped the ball by not just realizing what they had. But I also think, frankly, if the UFC had taken Doumbé and they did UFC Paris, right, they never would have allowed him to walk out with the mattress. He probably wouldn't have been the main event or even the co-main event. May have been the co-main event, but he's probably not the main event. And so they're not going to give him the time to walk out, to generate the chance, to generate this. We know that at this point, the UFC is such a cookie cutter that even when, we're lauding over Bryce Mitchell having camo shorts, we're lauding over when Israel Adesanya was able to dance a bit before he came in. We're so restricted in the UFC's model that it's kind of refreshing. Jesus, sorry. It's kind of refreshing in its own way to see this done in an organization where they will allow Doumbé to actually be himself. You know, like from a sporting perspective, I couldn't agree more with you that when Doumbé is 7-0, 8-0, whatever he's going to be, there's going to be some really, really interesting fights. And there are interesting fights in the UFC ad nauseum. Chuck any name you fancy in the top 15 against Cedric Doumbé, and we're having a really, really fun fight. But I think that from the personality perspective, PFL and Doumbé are probably maybe not the right fit in terms of the athletic endeavor, but from a personality and from a promotional endeavor, he's gold dust to them because he's elevating their stock drastically. Kylian Mbappe will chuck the PFL in his story or something like that, and that does a couple of 100 million impressions for you immediately, right?
Yeah, but not as much as it would in the UFC. And I do agree with you 100% in that maybe some of his personality would be muzzled by the UFC, which is another problem and another sign that the UFC is not what it once was in terms of what level of product it's wanting to give to us. It's just, for me, I'm all for the fighters and I want to see him getting paid more, but I also feel you look at certain moments like this as missed opportunities to help grow the sport in a positive manner, because you can take away all of the pillows and the mattresses. You can maybe take away the chant, but you won't take away the fact that Kylian Mbappe played a soccer match, got off from that game, got a shower, got into a private jet, and flew directly to Paris to watch this man fight. And he would have done the exact same thing in the UFC. And I felt that connection is what MMA needs to be somewhat legitimized. And we don't have that much opportunity to do that in mixed martial arts, where a lot of, and I'm not saying that like the mainstream media, we want the mainstream media to come in, but like that's going to be mainstream news if it happens and Kylian Mbappe is in the UFC, more so than what it is if it happens in the PFL. And it's not me to try to belittle PFL or Bellator, because it sounds that's what I'm doing. I'm just stating facts, is that PFL isn't where the UFC was for obvious reasons, because the UFC has been around for many times. And I feel the UFC, as the biggest, as they proclaim to be the biggest and the best promotion, should be looking for guys like this. And even if they don't put him on a fight night headliner, build him up, get him these couple of fights maybe over in the States. They've matched up 4-0 people over in the States before. They could give him the chance to eventually work towards a fight night card over in France. I mean, apart from Cyril Gane, I honestly, me and my feelings with Cyril Gane. I mean, I feel that Cedric Doumbé is tailor made to come in and take over that stardom from Cyril Gane. I mean, he has a lot more personality that Cyril has, to be honest. I know Cyril is producing some good performances, has fought for a title, and is a great representative of mixed martial arts. But I mean, I liken this to, we want the best fighters fighting in the best, the same way as we want the best soccer players to be playing in the best divisions in the world, or the same basketballers. We don't want any basketballers going over and playing in Europe when they could be playing in the NBA. Like, I just feel that way, and it's a harsh assessment, because Cedric Doumbé isn't really that so much in mixed martial arts, but what happened with him on Saturday night definitely was a big help. And I look at that for the benefit of the sport. And look, at having people spread out ain't all that bad either. But I think the UFC are talking out with this both sides of their mouth when they're trying to describe themselves as the best, because they prefer to bring in lower level quality. Like, I mean, I likened it, and I likened it to, all you have to do is not sign 5 Dana White Contender Series alumni to come in, and you're able to afford Cedric Doumbé's contract over the course of 3 or 4 fights, perhaps. And I don't know why they're refusing to do it. Well, I do know why they're refusing to do that. You explained it very well previously, but I don't agree with it, and that's my biggest qualm.
Yeah, so I think just to round this off, I agree with almost everything you say there. I think the only thing I disagree with is one of the things the UFC need in order to pivot is challenge, right? Bellator is not that challenge. And what I mean by challenge is they need somebody to show them that what they're doing is incorrect, or that they could at least be doing it better, right? And as it stands right now, the UFC are lining their pockets hand over fist with commercial revenue and pay-per-view revenue. Fine. So to them, they are doing perfectly well. Their owners and their stakeholders are telling them to not change anything, if anything, just improve what they're doing and dramatize and make it more drastic in terms of that. You have a couple of stars, sure, no problem. Sean O'Malley's and the Israel Adesanyas and the John Joneses and, you know, these sorts of people, absolutely Conor McGregor's, these people, bona fide stars, super important to the company, massively important. But they should be, you know, 0.01% of the roster, and everything else should be sort of a deluge in terms of their wages to sort of prop up those people. So 4 or 5 times a year, you have massive cards that sell out drastically, and everything else is just a product, right? It's just a product that you push out, and because people like the names, they go out and they follow that. Now, of course, if you get guys that are really good and really, really talented like the UFC have, then that's great. That's fantastic. But the bottom line is about maximizing star potential to sell as much as possible. Well, we, as fans of the sport, we would like to see certainly a Cedric Doumbé, a Roberto Soldic, whoever it is, named Francis Ngannou for sure, right?
Another one is AJ McKee, who became a free agent last year as well. They didn't pick him up. I think there's like I said, a couple. Aaron Pico is another one. I mean, you know, with Bellator coming on the market, and look at this lawsuit that's happening might be playing a little bit of an effect in them not wanting to make those decisions, and it might be different when it's over. But it's like rather than snap up the talent, Dana White chooses to belittle it. They choose to belittle, and that's why I don't agree with either. It's like where we're saying it's good. Why doesn't Dana White have that narrative? He wants to shit on all the rest of the promotions because he wants to portray that UFC is the best organization, but he's pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. But when they don't make these business decisions, in my opinion, and it sucks. I hate it. And I love that Cedric Doumbé is getting paid, and I love that there is competition. But I think that would still exist. And we're talking about a handful of people here. But that's a conversation we could go on about for days, really, on end. I think, you know, everybody has their own unique opinion on it, and this what this subject is it's based off opinion, you know, and one opinion, I have my opinion, you have your opinion, and other people have their opinions, and everybody is entitled to that. It's like, I feel, you know, to go out, we come here, we cover almost every UFC card every week. We shine it in a good light as much as we can, but we also have to talk about the times when we feel based off our opinion that they're not handling things right. You know, so I feel that these situations, I just feel that, especially in this case too, I'm wondering why the hell has this happened this way when you basically had. I feel that honestly, if the UFC matched the contract offer from the PFL, he would have been snapped up in an instant. They would have found a way to make it work. But like you said, they're not willing to go maybe above and beyond like they used to before in the past.
For sure. And go on, we'll move on.
We'll move on. Lazy King. Any final thoughts? You always have the voice. You're always the voice of reason that rounds us off. I think we pretty much covered it. Will we move on to the Lazy King?
We'll move on. I think maybe there's a speaker's corner that you and I and Sean can do about this.
Yeah, for sure. Let's chalk it down. The Lazy King was out against Brad Wheeler in the co-main event. A lot of hype around the Lazy King too, and you know, we could have maybe a similar enough conversation about him. He went out and did put on a great performance as well. It wasn't maybe quite the spectacle of Cedric Doumbé, but we're talking about a guy who's a lot more advanced in his mixed martial arts professional career here, a lot more well-rounded as well, but a supreme talent here in the Lazy King as well. You know, we can say that about the Lazy King and Cedric Doumbé. It's easy to go out and talk the talk. It's easy to have the fans having your back, but you got to go out there and perform, Harry. And he did do that, in fairness to him, against Brad Wheeler.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting to see Brad Wheeler pop up here. I didn't know that his contract with Cage Warriors had terminated, but you know, these things happen in MMA. This was a matchup that was really heavily in Lazy King's favor. I thought that it was competitive on the feet for as long as it lasted on the feet, but as soon as the Lazy King dropped into a double leg, it was finished very, very, very quickly. He managed to mount Brad Wheeler almost instantaneously after the pass. And then there was just a consistent Dagestani wrist ride alongside transitioning from the mount to 3/4 mounts to the back control. And the finishing sequence is pretty lovely. He just keeps punching chokes over and over until he eventually gets a deep enough grip over the jaw that he can pull the choke underneath the jaw of Brad Wheeler. And Wheeler's a solid grappler. He knows what's going on there. It's just that Lazy King is just levels and levels and levels above in terms of the grappling. And absolutely agree with you. It was a great performance in terms of the grappling. I think Brad Wheeler touched him a few times in those exchanges, and if Brad Wheeler's getting to you, then we probably want to shore up a little bit. But I also think my read of the fight specifically was the Lazy King was basically just playing on the feet until he wanted or could really see a takedown, and then as soon as the takedown happened, it was done. Really fantastic performance. Couldn't be more impressed.
And I think it has to be noted for the Lazy King too. Took this fight at 180 catch weight. He's looking to get down to lightweight to 155, and if he's able to go in there and ragdoll guys at 180, imagine what he could do at 155. But yeah, very good point. With Brad Wheeler moved to 18 and 14, so a record that leaves a lot to be desired. Lazy King Abdullah. I knew I shouldn't. I knew I should have stuck with the Lazy King. Abdurrahimov. Abdurrahimov. The double A's catch me every time. The Lazy King moves to 17 and 1. And we shall move on before I butcher his name any further. And who we're going to move on to, Harry, is Dakota Ditcheva. Who, in my opinion, you can talk about your Doumbé or you can talk about that situation, but I had talked to Sean about Ditcheva for a lot of years, and I feel that, she is one of the top prospects in the world right now, with her capabilities, her well-roundedness, the way she talks, the way she carries herself, and also the levels that we're seeing her improve each and every time that she steps in. She came in there against Cornelia Holm, moved to 9-0 with a lovely liver shot in round 3, which crumbled Holm. But before that, she was well in control of all the exchanges. And, the terminology that we've used time and time again, somewhat playing with her food before she got tired of it and finished the fight off. And she kind of alluded to that a little bit after the fight as well, and wanting to get that cage time as well, which is very valuable for a fighter, especially coming up in the early stages of their professional career. What were your thoughts on her performance and maybe Dakota Ditcheva overall as a fighter, Harry?
Ditcheva as a fighter, I couldn't agree more. I'm not sure if we were to make a list of top 10 prospects in the MMA world, Dakota Ditcheva's in there without a shadow of a doubt. And that's a huge statement. I think immediately you could see that there were levels and levels and levels difference between the two fighters. Holm was somebody who was quite flat-footed, and she was really desperately looking for takedowns early. And Ditcheva's footwork was just slick, and it was crisp, and she was cutting angles, and she was making lateral movements and bilateral movements, and the head movement was great. And she has a crushing right hand, lovely jab, knows when to kick, knows where to kick. Just on the feet, she's just fantastic to watch. Really, really fantastic. Long for the weight division and cracks. And that's the main thing. She really, really bangs when she lands that right hand. I do think there are elements of Ditcheva's grappling, specifically her defensive grappling, that needs some work. In the first round, she kind of fell into this sort of odd cage grappling exchange when Holm shot a lazy single. And so there are obviously improvements, and there are going to be. She's 9-0, We're certainly not saying at this point she's the finished article, of course. But if any lady isn't able to take her down and hold her down, which Holm certainly wasn't, they're in for a world of pain, because her striking is beautiful to watch. And to your point, the low kicks snap the legs between each other for Holm for the finishing sequence. She then leans all of that momentum through that left hook to the liver. And by the time that Holm is screaming in pain, Dakota Ditcheva's thrown her jaw to Rosette. And it's just absolutely beautiful striking. Perfect perfect accuracy. And Ditcheva knew immediately it was done. She didn't need to run over. The referee thankfully stopped the fight before any meaningful ground and pound happened. But my God, we have just a murderer, an absolute murderer in Dakota.
There's that viciousness there, like such a nice, portrays herself as a nice, sweet person in her interviews, but you see that nasty streak when she's in there as well, and it's something that we probably don't talk about enough, is that having that level of darkness inside you that you want to hurt somebody, because you need to do it. You need to have that darkness inside you. You need to want to hurt somebody pretty badly if you want to get to the very top of this sport. It's kind of, a little bit of narcissistic behavior, for, if you want to call it, and that you don't care about what your opponents do. It's kill or be killed mentality. I feel that mentality is better than anything else. It trumps anybody else's, competitive nature, when you have that little bit of extra edge, and that willing to showcase that level of violence inside the cage as well. It can really increase your output, and obviously it makes you an exciting fighter as well, Harry.
Agreed, completely agreed. And I think the other thing that impresses me about Ditcheva is she's obviously had a storied martial arts career up until this point, right? But the thing that I like is MMA has an opportunity to get you a level of exposure that is unnatural, I think, in other combat sports, other martial arts endeavors. And something that Ditcheva's done so brilliantly is when she's not fighting, you don't hear from her. You might see a clip here and there on an Instagram, or I'm training with this person, or I'm over here doing this camp at here or wherever. I'm over in ATT competing here, doing this, doing whatever, training here. But that's just, the regular rigmarole of being an athlete on social media. But you don't hear from her. She just disappears. And then when she's ready to fight, when she's coming to fight, she's out and she's in. She's out in the public and she's in your ears and in your eyes. And I think the thing that's impressive for that is she's not allowing MMA to take her away from what's necessary, and that's improvement. And that's every fight adding a new string to your bow. It's tightening up the things that you're already good at, and getting better at the things that you're not good at. And that, to me, speaks of somebody that understands what it takes to be successful in the sport. And that is something that we might talk about in some other fighters, but that we might not necessarily see. They might allow MMA to wrap them up into this celebrity bubble because it's such a niche place that you run away from what's important. And man, Ditcheva is not seemingly to do that. And Jesus, she's a force to be reckoned with. I'm super excited about her future.
Absolutely, me too. It's going to be very, very exciting to see her progression. She advances on to the finals in Dublin. She'll take on Valentina Scatizzi. Yeah, that's right. I was unsure about her first name. Valentina Scatizzi, out of SBG in Dublin. That would be an interesting fight, but definitely, I'm sure anyone who's listening is going to know Dakota Ditcheva. But like you said, she's up there, in my opinion, across mixed martial arts, in the men's and in the women's division, as one of the top 10 prospects in the world right now for where she can get to. Moving on to the next fight, we're talking about a level of viciousness that seemed to be maybe missing from Frans Mlambo's game in this fight, Harry. I feel, that little bit of nastiness just wasn't there than what we've seen. Now, it was a very, at times, smooth performance where Frans had a couple of hairy moments, but was never in big trouble, I guess. But it's like, it was a kind of a performance for me that left me wanting a little bit more. And I know that Frans is, I'm very interested. I'm hoping to talk to him in the next couple of days about that, just to kind of pick his brain. But, I don't want to be too harsh on criticism, because we are talking about a last minute change of opponent too that Frans had to deal with. So that's a very difficult. And a guy that came in that was game as fuck, Harry, to be honest, and Moktar Benkaci, who walked Frans down, tried to cut off the cage, tried to get off his left hook, and did quite well in the fight, if I do say so myself. Ultimately, it was Frans Mlambo that took home the decision by a split card. It almost took, like you said, it took about 6 weeks to watch this card, and 2 of those weeks were waiting for Frans Mlambo's decision to be announced after the fight. Very, very strange kind of happenings after that. But the performance itself, Harry, how did you see the fight playing out in your eyes?
it was a really close fight. And it was a really close fight, really unnecessarily. I feel like Frans made it more difficult for himself than possibly the skills that he has needed to make it, you know? Like he did such an amazing job when he was really, really backed up against the fence. And Benkaci, whatever his name is.
Benkaci, yeah.
Benkaci, fine. When he was looking to land the big left hooks and he was looking to really sit down on his punches and rotate his core through, Francis' head movement was wonderful for most of those exchanges. Really wonderful. Slips, rolls, lands his own shots, comes up with knees at the middle, lands big right hands, lovely shovel left hooks. Like, you can see that the ability in the striking is vastly different. But he never seemingly wanted to angle and reset off the cage in and of itself. He never really seemed to want to take the front foot, because when he was taking the front foot for brief moments, Benkaci was running into low kicks, running into body jabs, running into straight shots, and Frans was styling on him. There was a couple of moments where Frans was on the front foot and hurt Benkaci bad, once in the first round, once in the second round, but then he would retreat back towards the cage again. And I didn't quite understand why he was doing that, because it allowed Benkaci to come on and build confidence, because he wasn't immediately getting jabbed across the cage or wasn't being pushed back. And so I personally would be very interested to hear what he has to say in and of its own performance. It might be that he had an injury coming in, might be that there was something else, might just be that it was a late opponent change and he just wanted to ride the fight out where he felt the most safe. But I also felt, uncharacteristically for Frans, there was a couple of moments where his hands weren't in the right place, and there was a couple of moments when he seemed to overload on shots a little bit and wing the shot rather than place it. And, you know, something that we have said over the course of Frans's career is how accurate he is when it comes to striking. He's a pinpoint sniper. And so I felt a little uneasy watching the fight and seeing the way he threw some of those shots. It just felt a little off, a little awkward to me. Like you say, maybe something was going on, but I feel like Frans was levels above Benkaci, but made it more difficult for himself than maybe he needed to.
100%. That's the perfect synopsis of the entire fight, and that's the way I look at it as well. Now, in between rounds, he was dancing after. Maybe he just wasn't as much in the zone as he liked to be, and that can play effect. Look, we can sit here and speculate all day. Like I said, I'm hoping to speak to Frans about that. I'm very curious to pick his brain, but it's with Frans, it's like this hidden secret within Irish mixed martial arts how good of a fighter that he is. And after such an up and down last couple of years, he's kind of finding his groove right now. Look, it was a better performance, I think, than his first one in terms of his footwork and his elusiveness, but his accuracy was a little bit off. He backed himself into the cage, I think, more often than he should have. I think he would have done much better work, like we seen in his quarterfinal fight, out in the middle and the center of the cage, where he has that room to work as well. So, it'll be interesting to hear. But nonetheless, I feel he won once again, not performing to the best of his abilities, and you have to look at that as a kind of a positive sign as well. Late notice pullouts seem to be a trend in PFL, and especially in this card as well. John Mitchell, originally supposed to take on Alexander Shizov, who pulled out at the start of the week. Geysim Derouiche came in, again, a fighter that John had to fight in the quarterfinals of the tournament, and you're dealing with a last minute opponent change here from John Mitchell, but we pretty much saw a basic carbon copy of what the first fight was, with John Mitchell just utilizing his grappling to get Derouiche on the mat. And it's a pretty simplistic terminology, but if it ain't broke, Harry, there's no need to fix it. And I think that's the way it was for John Mitchell in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that was impressive to me most about Mitchell was he felt a little nervous in the opening exchanges, and I can understand that, right? Not only has Derouiche had 15 minutes of cage time with him previously and an opportunity to go and fill all those holes in, but it's also, again, short notice replacement and all of these sorts of things. And so the first takedown, the attempt at the takedown wasn't great. He sort of barreled in after our right hand and sort of collapsed his way to the hips. But as soon as that first takedown landed, we were off to the races. Like, it was very, very, very little that John Mitchell had to do in order to force Derouiche to overthrow, and Mitchell took every opportunity that he needed and just ducked under, grabbed a double, grabbed a single, ran it to a double, and Derouiche had nothing. Like, he had absolutely nothing. He had about 15 seconds at the start of the third round where he came out hell for leather knowing that he needed a finish, didn't get anywhere near it. John Mitchell ducked under, grabbed a double, and we were done for that round as well. And look, if you're fighting in a tournament, right, the thing that you absolutely must do is 1, fight smartly, and 2, fight to win. We're not here to be putting on performance bonuses. We're here to go and pick up 100 grand at the end of the tournament, or eventually £1 million in the end of the big tournament. And this is how you win tournament fights. You realize quickly what your advantage is over your opponent, and you go out and you utilize it. And for John Mitchell, a dominating, not vastly damaging, but he landed well enough to take the decision very, very handy. Came out really unscathed, right? Didn't take many shots at all. Took a couple of pop shots from the bottom.
Had a little message. He did have a big lump on the side of his head from one of the elbows, I think Derouiche said. But yeah, like you said, relatively unscathed. He was very happy with his performance too. We'll be speaking with John a little bit later on in the week about that as well. To look forward to picking his brain. But yeah, very, very good point about how you should be fighting in tournament fights here. We're not, you're talking about big money here. So I think John handled the fight very well and implemented his game plan very well. And I think it has to be said, with a guy like Geysim Derouiche, I think Dan Hardy kind of alluded to it on the boot as well, Harry. You're coming in against a guy that you beaten in the past, so it might be a little bit hard for you to get up. And you're taking on a guy who not only you've beaten in the past, but you've beaten in the fight previously. And, you know, all fighters and their competitive natures, you can be sure that Derouiche was absolutely like fantasizing about getting back in there and trying to change the result of that fight and being almost obsessive about that loss, because that's what all fighters will do after a loss. And I think we saw signs of that in the early stages, like you said, in round one. It was wild, tried to set a heavy pace. I thought John Mitchell did very well just to take the wind out of his sails a little bit and just let him know, no, this is not going to be your night. It wasn't the first time. It wasn't that night. John Mitchell will move on to take on Jakub Kazuba, who did beat Dylan Tuke on the night. We're not going to spend too much time talking about that. I'll just say, you know, I felt Dylan was a little bit maybe outsized in that fight. Obviously, he fought most of his career, came in fantastic condition, but ultimately, you know, the pace of the fight and the grueling conditions of the grappling exchanges were something that Dylan couldn't kind of maintain as the fight went on. And sometimes these things happen. So look, at he put in a good performance. He'll be back, and I'm excited to see what's next for Dylan. You still stick him on that Dublin card. You put him maybe in a featherweight fight and see how he gets on. But yeah, it will be Jakub Kazuba versus John Mitchell, along with Frans Mlambo in the finals in Dublin December 8th. And we should move on, Harry, real quick, and to discuss Cage Warriors. And probably, I think we need to have a drink of water before we talk about this fight. One of the best fights of the weekend, and you know, in pretty much Cage Warriors history, to be honest. It was absolutely insanity from bell to bell, and a typical Luke Riley fight. He went in there and took out Alexander Löof in the third round after an absolute war in round one and round two, with both fighters getting hurt multiple times. Harry, how do you unpack this madness?
You don't, like, you just have to go and watch it. I mean, this is what you get when you have two really, really solid prospects and they come in and they don't know what loss feels like. This is what you get. Now, something that Shawnee has discussed a lot is durability, right? And toughness, and the ability to take damage and come back and rally back and win fights. And look, Luke Riley said after his last performance, he didn't want to be in another war. He's found himself in another war here. And he's really going to, I'll say this from the top, he is going to want to limit the amount of wars he is having 100%. In the Cage Warriors organization, because if
I tweeted that right after the fight, like, he needs to, like, okay, it's as exciting, it's a spectacle, it's great to watch, but it isn't really sustainable, Harry.
It's not, no. And if his future is the UFC or the PFL or whatever it is absolutely imperative that he saves his chin and he saves his best days for those nights. Because yes, these nights, these performances, these wars, they bring you fan favoritism, they bring you reverie, but they don't bring you any money. And that again is not shitting on Cage Warriors at all. They are open about that. They do not pay their fighters dramatic amounts of money because they have to be able to keep the show going. And we, from a European level, understand that. When you look at a PFL tournament, or you look at a UFC, or you look at whatever, that's your route to real money, right? That's your route to real money. And if you're going in and getting paid a couple of grand in Cage Warriors to turn up and take 3, 5, 6 years off your life, that's not the way to do it. Now, I think in this specific fight, he just didn't have much choice. Like, we know that grappling isn't his A game. He is very much a slick striker, wants to be on the feet, wants to be outboxing, outstriking his opponents. But Löof just had everything for him, you know? First round.
Like, I mean, with Luft, we need to give a shout out too, because this
God.
guy looks a ridiculous prospect too. It's like look at Ian Dean. Like, we can say this time and time again, but like, Ian Dean is a master at pulling these guys out of the fire. Like, Christ Almighty, like, insane. Please continue, Harry, about Luft.
I couldn't agree more. Like, I just couldn't agree more. There's the gym that he comes from in Sweden is a tiny gym, and they just produce killer after killer. And fair play to the coaches and to the staff in that gym, because they're doing something right, that's for sure. And Luff came out, hurts Riley, hurts him bad. Riley manages to land a clip in the first exchange, hurts Luff. Like, I wouldn't have had a massive problem if they'd have stopped the fight at the end of the first round. Then Luff comes out in the second, energized, hurts Riley. Unfortunately, I think he makes a tactical error in that he takes Riley down and tries to ground and pound him out, and Riley manages to have enough nous to survive. I think Luff will look back on that and really, really, really regret his decisions, because by the end of the second round, I think two things happened. I think the first thing, Luff really spent a lot of energy trying to get Luke Riley out, trying to control those specific positions in the grappling exchanges and land damage and look for damage. But I also think he's never been in a situation where he's put that amount of damage on a fella and he hasn't gone away.
Yeah, that's mentally, like, that fucks you up mentally as well, where you're like, I've just unloaded on this guy and he's still here. Like, you know, it's going to be fantastic experience for him in fights to come. But, you know, like you said, it was probably the first time that he would have experienced that in his early career.
Right. And then Luke Riley danced out into the middle of the cage, touched hands with him and said, just so you know, I'm going to beat the fuck out of you now. And that's exactly what he did. He just murdered him with jabs to begin with, lands up a beautiful, big, big, big right hook. Luff is spent. And as I say, I think it's more mentally spent than anything, because he immediately covers up and the shots come and the shots come and the shots come, and he does his best to stay in there. But thankfully, the referee steps in and saves him in a perfect stoppage. Luke Riley lands a couple of shots and Luff's leg starts to buckle, and Mark Goddard steps in and immediately stops the action. And I think that, again, we have to give props to the three men in the cage on Friday night, because both the fighters gave absolutely everything. And Goddard, in my opinion, made the perfect stoppage. I don't need to see fighters in a heap unconscious on the floor from a barrage of shots. There's nothing you can do about a Cedric Doumbé left hand that just kills a fella. There's nothing you can do, right? You have to let the shot land. That's fine, whatever it is. You've no idea it's going to put him out like it does. It's fine. But when a guy is taking a sustained beating, and Mark Goddard is well aware that Löof has been hurt at least once already in this fight, I don't need to see him staring up at the lights unconscious with their eyes glazed over. Like, I am fine with him buckling like he did and Mark Goddard stopping the fight. Alexander Löof had no complaints about it either.
100%. Yeah, look at Goddard has been kind of criticized in the past, but he got this one absolutely perfect. I couldn't agree with you more. Last but not least, we'll stop at the main event on the night in Manchester. James Hendin versus Tobias Harila. Good fight until the unfortunate injury, Harry, in round 3, and that was a broken arm due to a takedown of Hendin. But the writing was pretty much on the wall for the fight. I think Hendin was the superior grappler. We saw that he was stronger in the exchanges, implemented his game plan not to kind of give Harila any space. to kind of get off his shots, or I felt it was two pressure guys coming together, but it was ultimately the pressure of Hendin and the strength that he had in the grappling exchanges that got him the job done and ultimately got him the win. It was a takedown that led to the broken arm. And what are we feeling right now about maybe Hendin, coming off only losses to Paul Hughes and Jordan Vucenic, which is, not nothing to be ashamed about at all. But he seems to be coming in and making some good strides. And he may be the next guy at featherweight. I mean, if to take Paul Hughes' word for it, maybe he's going to spend the remainder of his time at lightweight and possibly move on to bit greater pastures with Vucenic. I don't know. I don't know right now whether Vucenic going back into a title shot is the route for him. I think you go down to more Paddy Pimblett and give him more showcase fights until the time comes for him to eventually get signed and go on to greater pastures as well. But, at featherweight, which is a really shit-hot division right now, with Riley in that division as well, Hendon is kind of standing up a little bit from the pack here right now as to maybe who could possibly be the next champion in that division. Would you agree?
Yeah, possibly. I think there are a couple of improvements I'd like to see from Hendon. One of the things I would like to see is the amount of takedowns diminish. Like, it's all well and good, and I think this is kind of a double-edged sword, because one of the things I want us to talk about is how I think that high amplitude takedowns, if you have the gas tank for it, are a legitimate weapon. They're not even you just get picked up and then you're chucked on the floor and you're like, oh fuck, this is demoralizing, like whatever. Those are damaging, right? You are taking impact from not only yourself hitting the mat, but your partner crashing into you. And one of the things that you can't not do is you can't base out, right? You have to base out. Sorry. If Harila didn't base out with his forearm like he was going to, he just face plants the floor. Right. And nobody, you can't have that. You're risking.
Well, it's your natural reaction in that as well. When you're being thrust down, our natural response is to try and break or fall some way. Like, it's a freak accident. One would argue on that is that you don't leave your arm straight out and you try and brace the force on your elbow a little bit, but we're in the fucking middle of a fist fight here. So we can't be super critical that he decided to try and base himself out to protect his fall there as well. But yeah, a very, very excellent point, Harry.
Because, I wonder, I don't know if it is a freak accident. I wonder, it's a freak accident in and of itself, but Hendon landed 7 or 8 really big high amplitude takedowns where Harila had to base really hard on his elbows. I'm wondering whether, that's an accumulation of damage.
Very true. Because Hendon is looking to throw him down with impact. He's looking to try and hurt it there. So yeah, very good point as well.
And I wonder whether you can see now. Don't get me wrong. I would much prefer that Hendon gets one takedown at the start of the round and he dominates position and he lands a ton of damage and he eventually, accumulates or racks up enough damage to get a finish. Fine, or a submission, whatever he chooses, whatever. I much prefer that level of grappling. One, because it's utterly dominant, and two, it leads us more towards the elements that we're looking for from a judging perspective, where you have much more time to land damage and search for submissions. But if I'm James Hendin and I know that I can break fellas' arms or really diminish fellas by just picking them up and slamming them, and I've got 15 minutes worth of cardio to do that in, I don't know that that's not an absolutely wonderful game plan, because not only is it demoralizing for your opponent to constantly work yourself back up just to get launched again and slammed into the mat again, but if you can do so in a fashion that causes fellas to be landing awkwardly on their arms and basing out on their arms and weakening tendons and elbows and weakening tendons and wrists and shoulders and all these sorts of things, that's damage. That's damage,
It sure is. And, it's definitely to be noted. We've seen it a lot in recent fights, especially this year, Harry, injuries and impact and everything like that. And, everything is done with intent and sometimes these things happen. But very good point about James Hendon. And that kind of wraps us up. If you're to put your finger on, look at, obviously, I should have mentioned when we were talking about Luke Riley, he was the talking point of I mentioned the great surprise of getting the severe spotlight on a Sunday, by the way. I love it. Like sitting down relaxing on a Sunday evening, but boom, this comes up. I'm like, whoa, let's get it on here. Normally we get that fantastic article on on a Monday. We got it on a Sunday this week. You can check it out at SevereMMA.com. And maybe it answers the question that I'm going to ask you right now. If you're to put your finger on one performance throughout anything that you've seen this weekend, would it be Luke Riley? Would it be somebody else?
So I think the best performance of the weekend was Cedric Doumbé, just because of everything that went into it, right? Main event on a card like that in your home country and everything that surrounds it. But the reason I didn't write about Cedric Doumbé is because the Severe Spotlight is supposed to be centered around like a technical breakdown, right? And I had 9 seconds to work with, right?
It would have been the shortest one ever.
I mean, it would have been, he came in, he caught a kick, he threw a shot, the guy died. Like, what do you want me to write? Like, what else do you want me to write? So I wrote about Luke Riley more to just try and show the awareness of durability and how prevalent it is and how much it can really, really stand apart from other fighters. And, when you've gone in against a prospect like Alexander Löof and you've put on a performance like Alexander Löof put on, and Luke Riley still standing there in round 3, battering you, that's a different breed. That's a different type of fighter. That's a different type of human. And if he can bottle that up and hide it away for the next 5 or 6 fights and go out and win dominantly and look great in doing it, we might have something on our hands, because that sort of ability to dig deep, that sort of ability, I think he said he broke his hand in the first or the second round, and to still go out and put a performance on like that, that's a tough man, a tough man.
100%. Very, very well said. We started with Doumbé. We'll finish a little bit with Doumbé. I got it out in the open. We got passionate about it at the start. I feel strongly about that, and this is my platform to share that passion and my opinion. I'm not coming on an attack here of anybody who thinks differently than me about the Cedric Doumbé position. That's just how I feel about it. And, I'm not going to apologize for that, or I'm not going to go to war about it either. Do you know what I mean? I have to use my platform to share my opinions, whether it be good, whether it be bad, whether it be indifferent. And I've been passionate about that before. And look, all in all, it was the majority of what happened last weekend was Cedric Doumbé had a performance of a lifetime at PFL, and it was great that we got to see it showcased at some stage, even if I don't agree that what the UFC decision was ultimately, maybe not to pick up on it. Fair is fair. I've got to say it, but I got it. I needed to get that out of the system, Harry. We got it out, and then we can put it to bed now. But it's good that we have these characters in mixed martial arts. For me, I love, like you said, I love mixed martial arts, and I want mixed martial arts to always get the respect that it deserves. And I think with the UFC, it's a little bit of a love-hate relationship in regards to, for an organization that did once care about the sport and the growth of the sport. I don't feel that they're in the same position or have the same thought process about that, more so than being run as a multi-billion corporation right now. And that's just the way it is. Some people agree with it, some people understand it. I understand with it, and I don't agree with it, and that's just it. We'll just put it to bed. That was the balance breakdown / speakers corner / rant nation. My guy Harry Paolo had to listen to me for 30 minutes at the start. We'll be back next week to cover the UFC action. Grant Dawson versus Bobby Green, and a couple of other fights on that card as well. We'll preview that before we break it down. We'll see you next week at BJJ_Harry Powell at I O'Neill MMA is where you'll catch us both. Until the next time, take care, guys.